The moment has arrived to confront a reality that many find unsettling, yet it remains an undeniable certainty that most individuals choose to ignore. You do not forfeit authority over your existence simply because external circumstances are unkind. Rather, you lose your way because your internal landscape lacks a solid foundation. Throughout the day, vast amounts of time vanish not as a result of true indolence or a lack of concern, but because your focus was divided, shattered, and exhausted by constant reactions instead of deliberate intentions. A single digital alert triggers a chain of events, and a passing mood dictates your next move until, gradually and without warning, mastery over your life has quietly drifted away. This presentation is not designed to offer fleeting inspiration. Its purpose is to facilitate a complete internal restoration. The majority of people remain stagnant while waiting for the spark of motivation to strike or for a sense of absolute certainty to emerge, hoping that the chaos of life will subside before they commit to their own growth. This state of perpetual waiting is precisely where the failure lies. True command over oneself is not an emotional state but a skill to be developed through rigorous practice, and that development necessitates a clear framework. The significance of dedicating 60 minutes each day does not lie in the duration itself, but in the fact that it demands a definitive resolution from the individual. During this window, you cease the act of drifting and stop bargaining with your shifting temperaments, refusing to allow external forces to define your identity for that duration. You make a conscious selection, and that repeated act of choosing eventually transforms the entirety of your world. If you have ever experienced the frustration of a fragmented mind, or if you have frequently begun a journey with vigor only to see your energy quietly dissipate, then these words are directed toward you. It is rarely a lack of data that holds you back, as you likely possess sufficient knowledge. What is missing is the mastery over your own execution. Such authority is not gained by intense contemplation, but by the steady performance of necessary tasks even when the desire to do so is absent. This guide is centered on a fundamental concept. 1 hour of concentrated effort can renovate your mental outlook and return the reins of your life to your own hands, moving beyond abstract ideas into tangible reality. We are not here to pursue temporary happiness or to indulge in the hollow visualization of achievements, nor are we claiming that the path of self-regulation is inherently enjoyable. Instead, we are reconfiguring the fundamental architecture that governs your daily conduct, recognizing that your trajectory is determined not by your ultimate ambitions but by the weight of your consistent routines. Habits are never established through a sudden burst of creativity. They are forged by the expectations you set for yourself. Over the following 90 minutes, you will discover how to utilize this daily hour as a laboratory for growth, a stable setting where you can reconstruct your resolve, your concentration, and your sense of self, one deliberate step at a time. This process is not about reaching an obsessive peak, but about cultivating a reliable consistency. Within this time frame, you will learn to reclaim your power from the grip of distraction, to move forward without waiting for a mood to strike, and to see your commitments through to their conclusion. You will gain the ability to govern your emotional state under duress and establish personal benchmarks that are no longer open for negotiation. Changing your reality does not require you to flee from your current life. It requires you to bring order to it. While most people attempt to improve their psyche by altering their emotions, such changes are notoriously fragile and temporary. You will instead reshape your perspective by modifying your behavior, because the act of doing is what truly alters belief, and consistent discipline is what refines your character. This specific hour is not intended for aimless browsing or for numbing the mind with further digital noise. It is reserved strictly for development. On certain occasions, the process will feel effortless, but on many others, it will be a struggle, and that is perfectly acceptable. The objective is never comfort, but rather the total command of your attention and your responses, ensuring you have the choice to show up rather than fade away. Once this internal grip is restored, everything else becomes less complicated, not necessarily easier, but far simpler to navigate. You will find that you no longer engage in internal debates, or make your own excuses sound like logical conclusions. You will act simply because it is the appointed time to do so. This journey will not transform you in an instant, but if you remain devoted to this daily practice, it will reshape the person you are becoming. This is not a call to feel better, It is a blueprint for reconstruction. In this first chapter, we examine why a single hour possesses the power to alter everything. There is a common misconception that time is the missing ingredient, yet this belief is merely a comfort used to mask the truth. You do not lose your direction because you lack minutes in the day. You lose it because the minutes you do have are left unguarded, lack structure, and are consumed without any conscious thought. Time does not vanish in grand, obvious events. It drains away through minor, overlooked choices, a brief glance at a screen or a short pause that evolves into an hour of lost focus. The true harm is not the time that was wasted, but the weaker identity you confirm each time you allow your focus to be stolen. The practice of dedicating 60 minutes each day fundamentally alters your reality because it interrupts the cycle of chaos, not by increasing your workload, but by reducing it with specific intent. When you claim this hour and assign it a precise purpose, you establish a definitive boundary. You cease existing in a state of constant reaction, and instead build a wall between your current self and the person you are training to become. Many individuals spend their lives in a fragmented state, where their focus is divided and their energy is dispersed across a multitude of trivialities. Their schedules appear packed yet feel strangely vacant. They are perpetually occupied without a clear trajectory. Over time, this internal disorder becomes their baseline, which explains why the pursuit of motivation so frequently fails. Motivation does not fail due to a lack of character. It fails because it is forced to perform a role that only structure can fulfill. This daily hour is effective because it eliminates the need for negotiation. It is no longer a question of whether you feel inspired, whether you have sufficient energy, or whether you have finished every other task. It becomes a fixed point, and fixed points create an essential stability. When you arrive at the same time every day, a subtle internal transformation occurs. You stop seeking permission from your moods and begin operating from a place of decision rather than desire. This is the essence of true command. Consider how easily 60 minutes can seem insignificant, yet notice how formidable it becomes through the power of repetition. This time frame does not overwhelm the senses or trigger internal resistance. It does not demand a flawless performance, but simply requires your presence. Presence is precisely what most people lack in their daily lives. This hour is not about the intensity of the effort, but the unwavering nature of the commitment. You are not attempting to satisfy an external audience. You are cultivating a deeper relationship with yourself. Every time you honor this commitment, you reinforce a silent but powerful message. You are someone who follows through on their word. This realization compounds over time. Within a few days, you feel more grounded. Within a few weeks, your self-trust deepens. And within a few months, your very identity shifts, not because you adopted a new philosophy, but because you adopted a new behavior. Many underestimate how closely our sense of self is tied to our actions. Confidence is not built through vocalizing affirmations. It is built by honoring small promises to yourself until doubt no longer has any evidence to support it. This dedicated hour provides that necessary proof, serving as an anchor even when the rest of the day is in disarray. Even when your enthusiasm wanes, the framework remains intact. Even under significant pressure, you possess one sanctuary where you are not merely reacting to the world. This is the environment where self-governance is restored. Control does not imply a rigid, inflexible life, it implies having a clear direction. Within this window, you define the regulations. What matters is not yet what you achieve during those minutes, but the fact that the time exists, untouched, shielded from external noise, and entirely owned by you. Most people have never truly experienced this level of ownership, as their time is usually claimed by digital alerts, external demands, and impulsive habits. This hour reverses that dynamic. Rather than allowing the world to mold your mind, you shape your day first. Instead of sliding into action, you enter it with deliberate purpose. This is why small structures survive where grand, ambitious plans often collapse under the weight of reality. 1 hour is a manageable enough unit to repeat. And repetition is the only force capable of rewiring human behavior. This journey is not centered on productivity but on alignment. You stop scattering your vitality and begin directing it with precision, moving away from the futile attempt to control outcomes and focusing instead on controlling your inputs. These inputs are always within your reach. There will inevitably be periods where this hour feels futile, where no dramatic breakthroughs occur and progress remains hidden. These are actually the most critical moments, for these are the days you are training your resolve rather than merely chasing a result. Strength of character is built during moments of boredom, and mastery is forged through repetition. A single hour does not change everything because it is spectacular. It changes everything because it is dependable. It instructs your nervous system that consistency is possible, and teaches your mind that structure is a safe harbor. It proves to your identity that you are an individual who shows up even in total solitude. This is not a psychological trick, it is a fundamental truth of human conduct. Once this foundation is established, every other aspect of your life becomes easier to construct, not necessarily easier in terms of emotion, but far more stable in terms of structure. With 1 hour firmly locked in place, the remainder of your day has a center around which to orbit. You are no longer drifting, you are anchored. Chapter 2: Reclaiming Authority from Distraction. Distraction should not be viewed as a minor irritation, it is the primary mechanism through which authority is stolen from your existence. Most individuals perceive distraction as something harmless, a few minutes spent elsewhere, or a brief pause to fill the silence. However, distraction does not manifest as chaos. It presents itself as comfort, which is why it is so effective at undermining our intentions. You do not lose your concentration in one sudden event, you surrender it in small, incremental pieces. Every time you react to a stimulus instead of making a choice, your mind absorbs a hazardous lesson that external forces dictate what happens next. Over time, this reaction becomes instinctive. Your attention shifts before you are even conscious of the movement. Once your attention is compromised, your autonomy follows. Attention is the ultimate power. Wherever it flows, your life inevitably follows. Distraction shatters this power, keeping you busy yet without a destination, and active yet fundamentally unfulfilled. You may conclude your day feeling drained without understanding what you truly accomplished, not for lack of effort, but because your energy was never permitted to settle long enough to build real momentum. This is the reason willpower often feels inadequate. It was never intended to combat an environment designed to pull you in 1,000 different directions at once. You do not conquer the pull of diversion through sheer exertion. Rather, you overcome it by stripping away its dominance over your schedule, a process that begins with a heightened state of awareness. Distraction is never a series of random events. It follows predictable trajectories often linked to specific internal states such as monotony, pressure, or a sense of ambiguity. The very moment a task becomes demanding or uncomfortable, the psyche instinctively searches for an exit, and in the modern world, that escape is always within reach. However, every flight from reality carries a hidden price. Each time you bypass discomfort, you effectively postpone your own evolution, and every instance where you seek out noise, you diminish your capacity to endure silence. It is within that very silence, however, where true clarity is found. This dedicated hour you are establishing is not merely a window for labor, it is a vital retraining of your ability to remain present. It is about the discipline of staying with a single concept, staying with the necessary struggle, and staying with the unease without fleeing. This is the precise methodology for reclaiming self-governance. Many individuals fail to recognize the extent to which constant stimulation has conditioned their nervous systems. A perpetual stream of input keeps the brain in a purely reactive mode, training it to crave novelty and to resist any form of intellectual or emotional depth. If concentration feels draining, it is not due to a lack of inherent ability, but because you have been systematically conditioned to avoid it. Fortunately, this training can be undone. By shielding your 60 minutes from all outside interference, you transmit a powerful news signal to your mind. You are demonstrating that not every internal impulse requires an external reaction, that boredom is a survivable state, and that stillness is not a threat to be feared. Initially, this shift will feel jarring, which is to be expected. Your mind will naturally hunt for exits, manufacturing logical reasons to cease the effort or suggesting more convenient times and harmless interruptions. Do not view this as a failure. View it as a process of withdrawal from a deep-seated dependency. Authority returns the moment you cease obeying every restless urge, not by forcibly suppressing them, but by observing them without granting them the power of action. During this specific hour, diversion is not something to be battled, but something to be disregarded. You do not engage in a debate with the urge to look away, nor do you negotiate with it. You simply acknowledge its presence and choose to stay. That solitary decision to remain is more effective at restoring self-command than any collection of productivity tools, as it reinstates the power of the part of you that makes conscious choices. Choice is the foundation of everything. Distraction flourishes in the absence of structure, in those vague, undefined moments where nothing has been explicitly claimed and every impulse competes for your energy. This is why the hour must be clearly defined with the same schedule, the same boundaries, and the same absolute rules. There can be no notifications and no shifting between tasks, not because these things are inherently malicious, but because they fragment your essence. Focus is not defined by a peak of intensity, but by a continuity of effort. When your attention remains unbroken, even the most basic actions take on a new significance, and you begin to feel more grounded and complete. This state of being may feel foreign at first, not because it is contrary to human nature, but because it has been suffocated by digital noise. Once you experience this clarity, a fundamental shift occurs. You start to realize how often outside distractions were making your decisions for you, how many ideas were left unfinished, and how many goals never manifested into reality. As your awareness sharpens, so does your sense of personal responsibility. You stop pointing toward the world or your circumstances as the cause of your stagnation and begin to recognize your own behavioral patterns. This is the hallmark of returning control. While distraction insists that immediate relief is a necessity, self-command teaches you that relief can wait. One path follows the whim of the moment, while the other constructs an internal fortress. This strength is not aggressive or loud, it is stable and reliable. This hour is your training ground, where you build that resilience not by accumulating more information, but by holding your ground against the tide of impulses. By reclaiming authority from the world of distraction, you recover far more than mere time, you regain your sense of self-respect. On a profound level, giving in to distraction feels like a form of self-betrayal, as you are consciously aware of when you are avoiding a challenge or numbing your potential. That awareness slowly damages your self-trust. In contrast, the act of focus restores that trust. Each day you finish this hour without seeking an escape, you solidify a new identity, that of a person who decides exactly where their attention is directed. This new sense of self alters how you navigate the rest of your existence. You begin to pause more frequently, react less impulsively, and notice urges without being enslaved by them. You do not become a rigid machine, but rather an intentional being. Intention is the direct opposite of a life spent drifting. While distractions will never entirely vanish, they will lose their power over you, and as they do, your internal control will return, not with a sudden explosion, but steadily through the quiet power of repetition. This is not about isolating yourself from the world, but about becoming the sovereign master of your own attention within it. Chapter 3: Prioritizing Resolve over Inspiration. The fundamental error most individuals commit is waiting for a sense of readiness to emerge. They remain stagnant, anticipating that motivation, clarity, or self-assurance will spontaneously appear to propel them forward. When these fleeting emotions fail to manifest, progress halts, schedules collapse, and sincere promises quietly dissolve into hollow intentions. This stagnation is not necessarily a reflection of character, but rather a profound misunderstanding of the mechanics of human behavior. Inspiration is, by its very nature, a volatile and untrustworthy resource. It fluctuates according to your rest, your temperament, and your immediate environment. If your productivity is tethered to your emotional state, your trajectory will inevitably be erratic. Discipline exists to eliminate this instability. It is not an act of internal violence or force, but rather a framework that functions precisely when your emotions cannot. By placing commitment before inspiration, you invert the traditional order of operation. You initiate the action first, allowing the feeling to follow if it chooses. More importantly, you cease requesting permission from your moods, which is exactly where true self-governance begins. A common misconception is that discipline must be aggressive, punitive, or require an extraordinary amount of willpower. In reality, true discipline is a state of tranquility. It does not engage in arguments or attempt to convince you of its worth. It simply carries out the decisions that were made in advance. This is the vital distinction to understand. Motivation is a reaction, whereas discipline is a predetermined choice. When you resolve beforehand that this specific hour will occur regardless of your emotional weather, you liberate yourself from the exhausting process of internal debate. There is no longer a need for bargaining or emotional evaluation. You arrive simply because that is the standard you have set. This approach dramatically lessens the friction of existence, as the mental energy usually spent deciding whether to act is now preserved for the task itself. This is the secret behind the confidence of disciplined people. They are not necessarily braver than others, but they are significantly less conflicted. They succeed not because they always feel powerful, but because they have stopped waiting for the perfect moment to arrive. While motivation describes what you desire in a fleeting moment, discipline defines who you are as a person, and identity always outlasts the temporary waves of emotion. During this daily hour, your objective is not to exert maximum pressure, but to remain present when the initial excitement has evaporated and the novelty has turned into routine. These ordinary, quiet moments are exactly where your resolve is forged. Almost anyone can perform when they are inspired, but very few can continue when the feeling is neutral, and fewer still when it is uncomfortable. Yet personal evolution resides exclusively in that space of discomfort. Discipline instructs your nervous system that a lack of excitement is not a signal of danger, and that boredom is not a reason to retreat. Over time, your internal resistance begins to soften, not because the difficulty of the work has decreased, but because your relationship with effort has matured. You stop overdramatizing the struggle and lose the need for emotional alignment before you begin to move. Furthermore, a structured life protects you from the dangers of excess. While sudden bursts of motivation can lead to overexertion and eventual burnout, a disciplined approach keeps you steady, respecting your limits while maintaining an unwavering consistency. This balance is essential for long-term transformation. This 1 hour is not designed to leave you depleted. It is intended to serve as your anchor, the non-negotiable segment of your day that persists despite any surrounding chaos. This is why the most effective discipline is silent and repetitive, requiring no grand speeches or external hype, only steady execution. On the days when motivation does appear, you can welcome it as a helpful ally, but you must never allow it to take the lead. Inspiration can assist the journey, but while inspiration without structure leads to false starts, structure without inspiration still produces tangible results. The objective of this section is not to encourage a life of rigidity, but rather to foster a state of unwavering reliability. It is an invitation to cease delegating your actions to the whims of your emotions and instead construct a framework that remains functional regardless of the circumstances. This consistency is the foundation of self-trust, which naturally evolves into a quiet confidence that minimizes hesitation, the very place where most individuals lose their momentum. You do not need to experience a specific feeling of resolve to be a person of discipline. Rather, you embody that quality by proceeding as if the choice has already been finalized. Over time, this consistent conduct fundamentally alters your self-perception. You no longer view this structure as an external force you must impose upon yourself, but as an intrinsic part of who you are. Once this transformation of identity occurs, the role of motivation shifts entirely. It is no longer a prerequisite for progress but becomes a welcome addition to the process. It tends to appear more frequently because your actions have generated their own momentum, yet even in its absence, the foundation remains unshaken. The work continues uninterrupted, which is the true power of prioritizing resolve over fleeting inspiration. This approach effectively removes emotion from the position of authority without ignoring its presence. It grants you the freedom to acknowledge whatever feelings may arise while continuing to act with clarity and without internal conflict. This is the method by which self-command is stabilized, not through the suppression of your feelings or the constant pursuit of a high-energy state, but by establishing a routine that is indifferent to your daily mood. 1 dedicated hour, one singular resolution, repeated every day. That is the essence of true discipline, and once that discipline is firmly established, it ceases to be a burden and instead becomes the ultimate form of personal freedom. Chapter 4: Reconstructing Identity Through Conduct. The majority of individuals attempt to transform their core identity by altering their thought patterns. They immerse themselves in reading, reflection, and deep analysis, hoping that a sudden intellectual breakthrough will fundamentally change them. While these efforts may offer temporary relief, they rarely result in lasting transformation because identity is not constructed through contemplation, but through behavior. You do not evolve into a new version of yourself by merely convincing your mind of a different narrative. You become someone new by acting differently for a sufficient duration until the evidence of your change becomes undeniable. Your subconscious mind places its trust in what your actions repeatedly demonstrate. Every move you make transmits a specific signal. When you retreat, the message is unmistakable. When you procrastinate, that pattern is reinforced. Conversely, when you arrive and commit, even when the performance is flawed, the narrative begins to shift. Identity is never simply declared, it is recorded through the history of your deeds. This is precisely why action carries far more weight than intention. Intentions remain invisible to the world and to your own psyche, whereas behavior is tangible and undeniable. Your mind relies on what it can observe, and each completed task, regardless of its scale, serves as vital evidence. It acts as proof that you are capable of follow-through, that you possess the strength for consistency, and that your personal commitments hold genuine value. This accumulation of proof is what ultimately refines your self-perception. Most people fail to realize how delicate identity can be. It is molded quietly, day by day, by the most subtle of patterns. Every broken promise to yourself erodes your foundation, while every kept promise fortifies it. Over time, these recurring behaviors solidify into the rigid beliefs you hold about your own nature. This daily hour exists to systematically rewrite those beliefs, not through the use of empty affirmations, but through the weight of factual evidence. When you engage in your chosen work during this hour, you are doing more than just finishing a task. You are casting a definitive vote for the person you wish to become, the version of you who perseveres, stays focused, and refuses to vanish when the effort becomes taxing. Identity begins to shift the moment these votes start to accumulate. Initially, this transformation may feel somewhat artificial, leading to thoughts that this new behavior does not truly represent who you are. This is a natural reaction, as every new identity begins as a series of unfamiliar behaviors. The existing version of yourself will resist this change because it has the momentum of history and habit on its side. However, personal history is not a permanent record. It can be overwritten through persistent action. This is the reason why waiting to feel like a disciplined person before acting is a strategy destined for failure. You do not act because you possess discipline. You acquire discipline because you chose to act. The sequence of this process is of paramount importance, yet many people reverse it and find themselves perpetually stuck. Your dedicated 60 minutes are not focused on reaching a peak of performance, but on achieving a state of alignment. You are bringing your current actions into harmony with the person you are training yourself to be, rather than continuing to reinforce the person you have been by default. This alignment is inherently uncomfortable at the start, as there will be significant friction between your past self and your future potential. This resistance should not be interpreted as a reason to cease your efforts. Rather, it is a clear indication that your old identity is being successfully challenged. Furthermore, when you choose to remain steadfast despite this friction, your mind begins to update its internal story. It starts to entertain the possibility that you are indeed a person who honors their commitments, that you do not surrender as easily as you once believed, and that you are, at last, someone who can be trusted. That internal transition is quiet yet profoundly influential, as a sense of self constructed through deed is remarkably resilient. It does not crumble when faced with pressure, nor does it demand constant validation, because it is anchored in reality rather than imagination. You possess the memory of your own presence. You recall showing up when it mattered, and that is a fact beyond dispute. This is precisely why shortcuts are ultimately ineffective. When outcomes are achieved without exertion, the core identity remains stagnant. Conversely, when effort is exerted, even in the absence of immediate external success, the internal identity is fortified. Labor cultivates self-respect, which is not a fleeting emotion but a natural consequence of behavior that aligns with your personal benchmarks. During this dedicated hour, your attention should not be fixed on the final result, but on the act of execution itself. The goal is simply to perform the task you committed to, regardless of whether the work feels spectacular or mundane. It is in those unglamorous moments of routine that your character is truly tempered. You are not striving for a state of flawlessness, as perfection is inherently brittle. Instead, you are pursuing consistency, which is enduring. A single missed session does not dismantle your progress, but a habit of avoidance will, just as a pattern of follow-through will reconstruct it. Furthermore, deliberate action is the most effective remedy for uncertainty. Self-doubt flourishes in the absence of movement. The longer you remain stagnant, the more its voice dominates your thoughts. However, the moment you begin to act, that doubt is deprived of the space it needs to operate. Action effectively occupies the territory where overthinking once resided. You cease the endless cycle of questioning your own nature and instead provide a definitive answer through your conduct, an answer that gains clarity with every passing day. The process of reshaping your identity is rarely dramatic. There is seldom a singular moment of total transformation. Instead, it occurs subtly, beneath the surface of your conscious mind, as your psyche recalibrates to these new behavioral blueprints. 1 hour of focused effort, one repeated action, one steady day, this is sufficient to alter your trajectory. And a trajectory maintained over time eventually becomes your destination. You do not require a fundamental personality shift, you simply require fresh evidence. This hour provides that proof consistently, demonstrating day after day that you are capable of making a choice, maintaining a structure, and showing up without internal theater. Eventually, this process becomes effortless. That is how a new self is built, not by contemplating your way into a different existence, but by acting your way into a new identity. Chapter 5: Conditioning Concentration as a Faculty. Focus is not an innate trait that one either possesses or lacks. It is a dynamic capability that is either fortified through exercise or diminished through neglect. Many individuals mistakenly believe they have permanently lost their ability to concentrate, lamenting that their thoughts are scattered and their attention is irreparably fractured. In reality, they are describing a cognitive faculty that has simply withered from a lack of purposeful use. Much like a physical muscle that has been ignored, the mind will not perform at its peak upon a single command. It requires a structured program of conditioning. Concentration declines when focus is perpetually disrupted, when trains of thought are left unfinished, and when mental effort is discarded the moment it creates a sense of strain. Over time, the psyche adapts to this fragmentation, learning to oscillate between stimuli rather than remaining anchored. This adaptation is reversible, but the solution is not found in brute force. Focus is not enhanced by demanding extreme intensity, but by increasing duration, by remaining with a single task slightly longer than is comfortable and resisting the reflexive urge to switch, verify, or retreat. Your dedicated daily hour is not expected to be a period of flawless concentration from the first minute to the last. Harboring such an expectation only leads to unnecessary frustration. Instead, view this time as a regulated training environment, a sanctuary where the primary objective is to notice when your attention has drifted and to gently guide it back. This act of returning is the core of the labor. Every instance in which your mind wanders and you consciously redirect it constitutes a single repetition in your mental training. These repetitions accumulate over time, expanding your cognitive capacity and retraining your mind to endure and eventually thrive in states of depth. Initially, this process will feel arduous. Your thoughts will naturally stray, and a sense of restlessness is likely to emerge. Do not interpret this as a lack of progress. Rather, recognize it as the definitive signal that the process of strengthening your focus has officially begun. An unconditioned focus often feels jarring because the mind has grown accustomed to a relentless stream of stimulation. In this state, silence can feel deafening and stillness can feel burdensome, creating a powerful impulse to flee from the labor at hand. This very urge marks the threshold of personal growth. While most individuals retreat from this boundary, mistaking the sensation of discomfort for a lack of ability. This is the fundamental reason why your daily 60 minutes are so vital. They provide your internal voice with the foundation of reality, offering undeniable proof of your persistence and reliability. Without the presence of tangible deeds, any attempt at positive self-talk remains merely hollow noise. However, once your conduct changes, the narrative can finally be transformed. The objective is not to reach a state where discouraging thoughts are entirely absent, as that is an impossibility. Instead, the goal is to prevent those thoughts from steering your direction. Narratives will inevitably arise, but the difference lies in whether you choose to comply with them or simply witness them. Most people mistakenly equate their thoughts with their identity, treating every fleeting doubt as an absolute truth. If a thought suggests a lack of concentration, they believe it. If it claims a task is futile, they abandon their effort. Mastery over oneself begins when these mental suggestions lose their command. Throughout this hour, you are practicing a deliberate detachment. You acknowledge the mental commentary without allowing it to merge with your sense of self or dictate your physical movements. This creates a critical internal space where the power of choice resides. You do not change your inner dialogue by engaging in an endless argument with every negative impulse, but by simply refusing to let those impulses determine your actions. When you persevere in spite of a discouraging inner narrative, that narrative begins to lose its potency. Your mind is forced to recalibrate based on actual outcomes. If the voice predicts failure yet you continue to progress, it loses its authority. If it claims you are incapable of focus yet you remain present, it must update its assessment. Over time, the tone of your internal voice shifts, not because you have forced an artificial optimism, but because your reality has consistently contradicted the old story. Consistency is the primary tool for retraining the mind. There will certainly be instances during your practice where your thoughts attempt to derail your progress using familiar justifications, suggesting you are too exhausted, that the effort is not yielding results, or that a brief interruption is harmless. Do not view this voice as an adversary, view it as a lingering habit that responds to repetition. Every time you observe this dialogue and continue your work regardless, you are engraving a new psychological blueprint. Eventually, action takes the lead and thoughts are forced to follow. The internal voice becomes less theatrical, less definitive, and far less persuasive. You are not silencing it, but rather demoting it to a secondary role. Ultimately, a new tone emerges, one that is pragmatic, calm, and objective. It ceases to either flatter or assault your character and instead focuses on simple direction: initiate the task, maintain the focus, and complete the hour. This functional dialogue is built through steady effort, not discovered through contemplation. Its purpose is not to provide comfort, but to maintain your trajectory toward your chosen standards. Many individuals remain stagnant because they wait for their thoughts to feel supportive before they are willing to act. In truth, that support is a consequence of action, not a prerequisite for it. Confidence is essentially the resonance of consistency. As you repeatedly honor this daily hour, your internal voice begins to align with effort rather than resistance. It stops magnifying minor discomfort into a catastrophe and ceases turning temporary difficulty into a permanent identity. You are no longer someone who is fundamentally unable to focus. You are an individual actively training that faculty. This shift in language is crucial, as the words you use shape your perception, which in turn directs your behavior. You can use this loop to either imprison or liberate yourself. Rewriting your internal dialogue means interrupting this cycle at the point of action. You behave differently, and the language is compelled to adjust. This hour is where that transformation occurs. When your conduct matches your standards, the internal conflict subsides. You no longer need to argue with yourself because the decision is already finalized. Your thoughts eventually become a reliable ally, guiding you through the effort rather than pushing you away from it. This is the true meaning of reconstruction, a voice that has finally learned to follow your lead. Chapter 7: The Mastery of Conclusion. Initiating a project is effortless. Bringing it to a definitive close is rare. Failure for most individuals does not stem from a deficiency of ambition, but from a persistent inability to achieve completion. Many begin a journey with high energy, vivid excitement, and the strongest of intentions, yet they falter in the middle, at the precise moment when the labor becomes mundane, repetitive, or ambiguous. They do not quit with a dramatic announcement, they simply drift away. These abandoned tasks accumulate in the recesses of the psyche, each one broadcasting a damaging message, a lack of follow-through. Over time, this recurring signal solidifies into a core identity, eroding self-assurance and weakening the foundation of self-trust. Consequently, when the next significant opportunity arises, it is met with a paralyzing hesitation. Conclusion is the ultimate remedy for this internal damage. Achieving closure is not a pursuit of perfection, it is an act of finality. It instructs the mind that effort results in a resolution rather than a fade-out, ensuring that your personal commitments carry genuine weight. This is why finishing what you start is fundamentally an act of self-respect. During your dedicated daily hour, the objective is not to hunt for novelty, but to master the art of completion, to guide a task from its inception to its end, regardless of how modest that end may be. While many overestimate the importance of the initial spark, they fail to recognize that while starting generates momentum, only finishing generates belief. Belief is the psychological asset that endures long after the initial excitement has vanished. When a task is finalized, the nervous system experiences a necessary release. The cognitive loop closes, eliminating lingering tension and mental noise. Completion signals a state of safety, demonstrating to your mind that effort does not lead to a state of perpetual struggle. Unfinished work, conversely, keeps the psyche fragmented, pulling attention backward and generating a subtle, underlying anxiety. Your system retains a memory of every unfulfilled commitment, even if you are not consciously focused on it. This hour serves as the laboratory where that pattern is rectified. You must select tasks that are achievable within the time frame, resisting the urge to overextend. The discipline lies in stopping at the appointed finish line, rather than allowing the work to dissolve into distraction or avoidance. Finishing also necessitates the establishment of clear boundaries. It teaches you to define success with precision, allowing you to recognize when a task is truly done. Without this clarity, nothing ever feels settled, and when nothing feels settled, motivation eventually collapses. Completion grants a sense of meaning to your exertion. There will inevitably be moments when finishing feels redundant, when a familiar, dangerous thought suggests that you have done enough and can resume later. Later is often a graveyard for intentions. To combat this, you must design your work to be finishable, breaking it down into units that respect the constraints of time and energy. 1 hour, one clear conclusion. This is how consistency survives. This practice also alters your approach to challenges. Instead of being overwhelmed by the total scale of a project, you begin to ask what the next complete, manageable step is. This reframing replaces vagueness with sequence, and sequence is inherently easier to navigate. Each finalized task reinforces a fundamental truth: you are a person who can be trusted to finish what they begin. This trust compounds, making decisions easier and weakening the grip of procrastination, which thrives on open loops. Closing those loops allows the mind to settle into a state of quiet confidence. This chapter is not about superficial productivity techniques. It is about psychological integrity, the alignment of intention with action. When these two forces match, your self-assurance stabilizes. You stop overpromising to yourself and become more selective with your commitments. This restraint is a hallmark of maturity. Furthermore, finishing builds a necessary patience. You learn to endure the middle, the least exhilarating phase of any process where progress feels invisible and feedback is scarce. Most people abandon their efforts here, misinterpreting boredom as a sign of failure. Boredom, however, is a neutral state, not a verdict on your potential. By persevering through boredom to reach the end, you prove that your feelings do not dictate your outcomes. This is the essence of control. This hour is your training ground for that separation, where you move steadily toward a defined end without the need for inspiration or the escape from discomfort. On certain occasions, the conclusion will seem distant and demanding, while on others, it will be reached with surprising speed. Both scenarios are entirely valid. The only factor of true consequence is that you arrive at the designated end. By consistently achieving closure, you condition your internal system to anticipate a resolution. Over time, this expectation serves to diminish underlying anxiety and sharpen your concentration, as you operate with the calming certainty that your exertion leads toward a tangible result. Most individuals fail to realize the immense psychological burden imposed by uncompleted projects and intentions that were never finalized. Finishing a task lifts that weight, clearing the mental landscape for future growth. 60 minutes each day is a sufficient window to transform this behavioral blueprint, not by attempting to achieve a higher volume of work, but by selecting fewer objectives and seeing them through to the end. This is the primary method for restoring self-trust. Commit to fewer actions and ensure that what you choose is fully realized. This section serves as a vital reminder that your life is not transformed by the act of beginning, but by the discipline of concluding. When practiced daily, completion becomes a quiet yet formidable source of personal authority. 1 hour, one finished task, repeated without fail. This is the path through which self-command becomes a permanent fixture of your character. Chapter 8. Emotional Governance Under Duress. The existence of emotions is not the primary obstacle. Rather, it is the absence of authority over them. A common misconception suggests that emotional command requires the total suppression of feelings, remaining perpetually neutral, or refusing to react. This approach generates internal tension rather than genuine strength, for emotions do not vanish when they are disregarded. Instead, they accumulate beneath the surface and emerge with greater force when under strain. True emotional governance is not an act of denial, but a process of regulation. Pressure serves as a diagnostic tool, revealing the boundaries of the internal system you have constructed. In the absence of a solid framework, emotion dictates your behavior. With a structure in place, emotion can be experienced and processed without causing personal or professional damage. This is why your daily 60 minutes are most critical during periods of high stress. When under pressure, the mind instinctively seeks shortcuts, allowing old habits to resurface and impulsive voices to grow more demanding. Without conditioning, reaction becomes an automatic reflex. Training is what interrupts that automation. Self-command begins with an early state of awareness rather than mere restraint. You do not attempt to halt the emotion itself. Instead, you detect its presence early and observe the physical sensation without granting it immediate action. This brief pause is the precise moment where autonomy is restored. Most individuals never experience this pause. They simply react, justify their conduct, and move forward. While the reaction may provide a fleeting sense of relief, it reinforces a hazardous pattern. It teaches the nervous system that every emotion necessitates an immediate physical response. Your dedicated hour instructs the psyche in a different lesson. During periods of concentrated effort, various emotions will naturally emerge: frustration, restlessness, or self-doubt. These are not indications that something is failing, but evidence that real effort is occurring. The pivotal factor is your subsequent move. Instead of seeking an escape, you remain. Instead of reacting impulsively, you regulate. Regulation is a refined skill, fortified through the same repetition used to build focus. You acknowledge the feeling and continue with the work at hand. No internal drama, no manufactured narrative, and no harsh self-judgment. This persistence effectively rewires your response to stress. Your nervous system learns that internal discomfort does not require an immediate external remedy, and that emotions can exist within you without being in command of your behavior. Over time, the intensity of these feelings decreases, not because they have vanished, but because they are no longer magnified by your own reactions. This is the source of true composure. It is not a passive state, but a manifestation of regulated strength. Furthermore, emotional governance protects the integrity of your decision-making. Under high pressure, choices tend to narrow, and individuals often default to their most basic habits. If those habits are reactive, the outcomes are poor. If they are structured, you remain effective regardless of the environment. By dedicating 1 hour each day to this practice, you are training yourself to operate under a manageable level of pressure. This daily exposure increases your tolerance and builds genuine emotional resilience. Resilience is not defined by a tough or rigid exterior, but by flexibility under a heavy load. Most emotional outbursts are not triggered by a single extreme event, but are the result of accumulated pressure and small stresses stacked without a healthy release. This hour provides that release, not through the act of venting, but through the discipline of regulation. You are training your system to handle exertion without reaching a state of overload. Consequently, when pressure arises outside of this hour, your response is fundamentally different. You breathe before you speak, you pause before you act, and you create a vital space between the stimulus and your response. The internal space between a stimulus and your response represents the ultimate form of personal freedom. Exercising emotional governance does not result in a cold or detached personality. Rather, it produces a state of absolute clarity. You continue to experience the full depth of your feelings, but you no longer allow those emotions to hijack your chosen trajectory. This distinction is vital. Self-command is not characterized by an absence of feeling, but by the persistent presence of choice. During this dedicated hour, you are practicing the high-level skill of choosing continuation over reaction. Your emotions may protest or intensify briefly as you deny them immediate satisfaction, but this is a natural part of the process. By remaining steadfast, you instruct your internal system that you are the one in charge. Leadership, after all, must begin internally. You must lead your own attention, your own effort, and your own response before you can lead anything else. This internal leadership is the bedrock of self-respect. As you master your reactions, you cease to fear your own emotional states and stop avoiding circumstances that might trigger them. You develop a stabilizing trust in your ability to navigate pressure because you have simulated that very experience through daily practice. Without this level of emotional regulation, discipline is fragile and tends to collapse the moment stress increases. With it, your structure remains intact even when external conditions are far from perfect. Since life is rarely ideal, this capacity for groundedness is foundational to long-term consistency. It allows you to remain fully engaged with your goals without escalating into internal chaos or burnout. Ultimately, this chapter is an invitation to become deeply anchored, to feel intensely without losing your sense of direction. This shift fundamentally alters your experience of reality. Pressure is transformed from a threat into useful information, and emotion is viewed as a signal to be interpreted rather than a command to be obeyed. You begin to respond with deliberate intention instead of raw impulse. This is the essence of genuine control, and it is constructed within this 60-minute window of facing mild discomfort and prioritizing regulation over reaction. These benefits do not manifest in a single dramatic event. They compound with a quiet, unwavering reliability. This reliability under duress is the defining factor that separates a stable, successful life from one ruled by perpetual disorder. You do not train for emotional mastery by retreating from your feelings, but by standing steady and sovereign in the midst of them. Chapter 9: Establishing Non-Negotiable Benchmarks. The majority of people navigate life based on fleeting preferences. They engage in what feels pleasant, what seems achievable, or what is most convenient at any given moment. Consequently, when their external circumstances shift, their conduct shifts along with them. This results in a state of perpetual inconsistency, not necessarily because of a lack of character, but because nothing in their lives has been firmly resolved. Standards exist to eliminate this internal bargaining. A standard is fundamentally different from a goal or an intention. It is an absolute rule that removes the need for debate. When you operate from a foundation of clear standards, your behavior becomes predictable and reliable rather than rigid. You no longer evaluate your emotional state or weigh the advantages and disadvantages of taking action every single day. You simply execute the task because that is the contract you have established with yourself. This is the reason why benchmarks are significantly more potent than motivation. While motivation is subject to constant fluctuation, a standard remains steadfast. In the absence of these rules, every single action demands a fresh decision, leading to cognitive fatigue and a natural increase in internal resistance. Eventually, the mind finds a way to justify avoidance. Standards remove this friction by transforming action into your default state. Your dedicated daily hour is not merely a habit you are attempting to form, it is a standard you are training, a non-negotiable segment of your existence that persists regardless of your energy levels, your mood, or your environment. Once this is firmly established, the practice ceases to feel like a heroic effort and begins to feel like a normal part of your day. Reaching a state of normalcy is where true power resides. Many individuals resist the idea of standards because they equate commitment with confinement, fearing a loss of flexibility. In reality, these benchmarks are the architects of freedom. They drastically reduce mental noise, shield your energy from unnecessary drain, and clarify your expectations for yourself. There is a profound sense of calm that comes from knowing exactly what will happen and when, without the need for a daily internal argument. Furthermore, non-negotiable standards serve as a mirror that exposes avoidance. When a task is no longer optional, excuses become transparent, allowing you to see your own behavioral patterns with absolute clarity. While this level of honesty can be jarring, it is a vital prerequisite for growth, as self-command cannot be constructed upon a foundation of self-deception. It is important to understand that standards do not demand a state of flawlessness. They demand an unwavering consistency. A single instance of falling short does not dismantle a standard, but the act of repeatedly negotiating the terms of your commitment will surely erode it. The primary danger is not a one-time failure, but the gradual weakening of your resolve. Every time you bargain with a standard, you diminish its authority. By refusing to negotiate, you ensure that your progress remains steady and that your internal structure remains sound, regardless of the chaos of the world around you. Every instance in which you honor your commitment serves to fortify your sense of self, for identity is ultimately forged from the principles you refuse to compromise. This daily hour is the arena where that refusal is refined. You are not striving to optimize every minute detail. Rather, you are establishing a fundamental baseline, 60 minutes dedicated exclusively to exertion, concentration, and follow-through. As time progresses, this baseline evolves into a vital reference point. You begin to evaluate other obligations against it, shielding this window from intrusion and organizing your life around its existence rather than attempting to squeeze it into the remnants of a busy day. This shift in perspective is transformative. Individuals who live by clear standards rarely experience the suffocating weight of constant overwhelm. Though they may be occupied, they are never fragmented. Their deeds are in harmony because their internal regulations are unambiguous. In the absence of such benchmarks, every impulse competes for attention. With them, priorities become self-evident. Constructing these standards also demands a degree of restraint. It is far more effective to establish a few essential rules and uphold them without fail than to create an exhaustive list that leads to burnout. Excessive regulation generates unnecessary pressure, while a total lack of it leads to a life spent drifting. 1 hour a day is a sufficient foundation. Within this time frame, you maintain basic, unwavering benchmarks, arrive punctually, remain present, and finish the hour. You do not require high intensity or constant variety, you simply require reliability. This consistency is what builds profound self-trust. When you possess that internal confidence, your decision-making is simplified. You no longer overthink because you understand exactly how you operate. Furthermore, these benchmarks reinforce your emotional governance. When a passing mood attempts to bargain, suggesting you are too exhausted or that today doesn't matter, the standard provides the answer. It does not respond with aggression, but with a calm finality. The choice has already been finalized. This eliminates the drain of internal conflict. You stop the exhausting process of fighting yourself because the rule exists, and you follow it. Gradually, this creates a growing sense of internal tranquility, liberating mental energy, and deepening your capacity for focus. You feel fundamentally grounded, not because your external reality has become easier, but because your internal responses have become stable. Most people exist in a state of perpetual negotiation with their own impulses. Standards bring that exhausting cycle to a close. This philosophy is not about becoming rigid or inflexible, it is about becoming anchored. An anchor does not prevent movement, it prevents you from being swept away by the tide. Your dedicated hour serves as that anchor, holding you steady while the world around you shifts. It ensures that your evolution continues even when conditions are far from ideal. This is the profound utility of non-negotiable benchmarks. They transform effort into identity, intention into conduct, and discipline into a deep sense of self-respect. You do not need to feel powerful every day. You simply need a set of rules that are no longer open for debate. Through one standard and 1 hour every day, you quietly and firmly reshape the landscape of your existence. Chapter 10: Securing the Framework for the Future. Establishing self-command is a significant achievement, but maintaining it indefinitely requires a different level of mastery. Most individuals do not experience a dramatic collapse of their progress. Instead, they suffer from a gradual erosion of their internal structure. Systems begin to fade, boundaries loosen, and standards that once seemed absolute slowly become optional until they eventually vanish. Ensuring long-term authority requires locking the framework into place, not to create a state of rigidity, but to ensure durability. You need a system resilient enough to withstand periods of monotony, high stress, and the inevitable shifts of life. A structure that functions independently of your current level of enthusiasm. Your dedicated daily hour is not a temporary phase or a short-term project. It is the permanent foundation upon which your character rests. To secure it, you must undergo a shift in perspective. This time frame is no longer just a task you perform, but a reflection of who you are. It represents your personal benchmarks and your baseline for self-respect. When behavior is fully integrated into your identity, the need for conscious effort begins to dissipate. The primary threat at this advanced stage is subtle. As your progress accumulates, and you feel more stable and capable, the sense of urgency that initially drove you may start to wane. Your mind may begin to suggest that such a rigorous structure is no longer necessary. This whisper of complacency has dismantled more disciplined lives than outright failure ever has. The framework exists precisely for those moments when it feels redundant, for those are the times when your internal order is most vulnerable. When life appears manageable, your discipline must remain fortified rather than relaxed. While consistency is the engine that produces results, maintenance is the shield that preserves them. Securing the system involves the systematic removal of decision points. The fewer choices you are forced to make each day, the more resilient your habits become. The schedule remains fixed, the regulations remain simple, and your expectations remain transparent. You do not wait for inspiration to upgrade your system. You work to protect it when you are at your most comfortable. True maturity is demonstrated through sustainability rather than sudden spikes in intensity. Long-term command is built on the choice of what can be maintained even under imperfect conditions. The 1-hour model is effective because it is fundamentally realistic. It respects your energy constraints and allows for necessary recovery. This is why the structure endures even when your environment changes. While the specific focus of your work may shift or the content may evolve, the underlying architecture remains constant. This continuity is what keeps your identity stable, ensuring that you are never forced to start over when circumstances shift, but are simply continuing a journey already in progress. Another essential element of a permanent system is the capacity for rational forgiveness without the abandonment of the structure. Disruptions are inevitable, and days will occasionally be missed. The error is not in the lapse itself, but in allowing that lapse to become a negative narrative. You must refuse to spiral into drama or self-criticism. Instead, focus entirely on the speed of your return. A quick re-entry is far more valuable than a record of flawless adherence. The system remains resilient because it permits you to resume your practice without the burden of shame. Shame only creates a psychological distance that eventually breaks the structure. Self-command thrives in an atmosphere of neutrality. When you treat your daily hour as a fundamental fact of your existence rather than a constant test of your worth, you remove the emotional weight that leads to burnout. There is no pride in success and no punishment for a slip. There is only the steady, quiet act of continuation. This audiobook is a reconstruction 1 hour a day to rebuild your mindset and take back control of your life. It's not about being extreme, it's about being consistent. 1 hour a day to train focus, discipline, emotional control, and identity brick by brick. Start now, stay focused, finish what you start, and over time you won't just change your life, you'll change who you are. 1 hour a day changes everything, not because it's magical but because it's yours, claimed, protected, and repeated until control is no longer a goal but a reality. The system is locked, now execute. This perspective is essential for survival. Many individuals inadvertently undermine their own endurance by intertwining their ego with their discipline. They become so deeply invested in the identity of being perfectly on track that any minor deviation feels like a catastrophic failure, leading them to abandon their efforts entirely. You can circumvent this trap by prioritizing the framework over your self-image. The dedicated hour exists independently of your pride or your shame. You arrive whether you feel ahead of your goals or lagging behind. This neutrality is what keeps the system functional. As time passes, the advantages of this practice may become less obvious to the eye, yet they grow significantly more profound. You eventually stop consciously noticing your discipline because it has become an integrated part of your nature. Concentration is no longer a struggle because it is always accessible. And emotional governance becomes your default setting. This is the definitive hallmark of a secured system. It no longer demands your constant attention because it operates quietly in the background of your life. Because this foundation is solid, every other aspect of your existence begins to refine itself. Your decision-making becomes more acute, your stress levels subside, and your self-assurance stabilizes, not through sudden bursts of progress, but through an unwavering consistency. Such reliability is a rare commodity. To truly secure this system for the long term, you must also simplify the language you use. You cease speaking of trying or hoping, and instead state, "This is what I do." This linguistic shift is vital, as it reinforces a permanent identity. While effort can be temporary, being is enduring. Ultimately, this daily hour is not a temporary challenge, a streak to be measured, or a passing phase. It is the architecture of the life you live within. Once the system is locked, the need for motivation becomes irrelevant, and your evolution continues without internal theater. You stop contemplating the concept of control because you finally possess it, not in a way that is perfect or absolute, but in a way that is profoundly reliable. And in the end, reliability is sufficient. You do not need to dominate every second of your existence, you simply need to stabilize it. This system achieves that stability quietly and daily, without the need for negotiation. Lock it in. Shield it from the seduction of comfort as much as from the disruption of chaos. Return to it with a calm, neutral focus and allow it to become your new normal. This is how authority over one's life is sustained, 1 hour a day, not for a fleeting season, but for a lifetime. Once the framework is secured, you are no longer tasked with rebuilding your mindset, you are simply maintaining its strength. Self-command is constructed rather than discovered. There is no singular moment when authority suddenly manifests, nor is there a definitive finish line where your internal order locks into place for eternity. Instead, control is established quietly through the persistent application of repetition, framework, and restraint. What has been presented here is not a philosophy intended for mere admiration, it is a functional system designed to be lived within. The dedication of 60 minutes each day is not a pursuit of an impressive appearance, but a strategy that yields tangible results. You have observed how true mastery begins with structure rather than temperament, how concentration is conditioned rather than found, and how resolve must precede motivation for a new identity to follow action. None of these elements require a peak of intensity, they demand an unwavering consistency. This is the distinction that most individuals fail to grasp. They remain stagnant while waiting for change to feel monumental, yet lasting transformation does not announce itself with fanfare. It settles in gradually until it becomes your new normal, and once it is normal, it ceases to feel like a burden. That is the precise moment when self-governance becomes a reality. You are not concluding this experience with a simple list of regulations, you are moving forward with a robust framework, a new way of relating to time, focus, labor, and emotion that does not disintegrate under duress. The daily hour you have established is not centered on productivity metrics, it is centered on ownership. This is the ownership of your focus, the mastery of your reactions, and the ultimate decision of whether you show up or fade away. This sense of possession fundamentally alters how you navigate the world. When the noise of life increases, you remain calm. When pressure intensifies, you do not fragment. And when motivation vanishes, you do not stop. You are no longer tethered to your emotional state. because you are anchored in the person you have trained yourself to be. This is the silent strength of structure. It eliminates internal friction. You stop the process of bargaining with your own impulses because the choice has already been finalized. The hour arrives, you step into the labor, and the discussion ends. From that fundamental simplicity, true freedom emerges. You no longer feel the need to govern every external variable. You only need to govern what truly matters: your attention, your actions, and your responses. There will inevitably be occasions when the hour feels seamless, where your focus is fluid and time passes with ease. You should appreciate those moments without becoming dependent on them, for the system was truly engineered for the ordinary days, the periods of fatigue and the moments when nothing feels particularly significant. Those are the days where your identity is actually maintained. If you happen to miss a session, you must refuse to overdramatize the event. You simply return. If your life shifts, you modify the content of your work but never the underlying structure. The hour remains a constant, and the standard holds firm. This is the path to permanent control, not through a life devoid of failure, but through a life that never abandons the framework. Over time, a subtle transformation will occur. You will cease the search for motivation, stop chasing the illusion of absolute clarity, and no longer wait for confidence to arrive. All three of these states will evolve into outcomes rather than prerequisites. Confidence will emerge from your consistent follow-through, clarity will be the result of sustained focus, and motivation will fluctuate without consequence to your progress. You will no longer find yourself in a cycle of constantly rebuilding your mindset. Instead, you will be maintaining it as something of immense value. This respect is paramount. Most people do not lack inherent capability. They lack self-trust, and that trust is restored through the honoring of small promises rather than the achievement of grand victories. 1 hour a day is sufficient to rebuild that foundation, not instantly, but with total reliability. While this presentation concludes here, the actual labor does not. Tomorrow, the hour returns, as it will the day after and every day following. This is not because you are forcing yourself into a mold, but because this practice has become an intrinsic part of your identity. You do not need to feel prepared or inspired, you only need to arrive. Mastery is not an object to be found, it is something you construct daily, quietly, and without negotiation, 60 minutes at a time. If you protect this hour, it will, in turn, protect you, not by removing the difficulties of life, but by ensuring you never lose yourself within them. That is the true victory, and it is already within your grasp.